Welcome, Tami. I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away.
Thank you, Tanya, for that warm welcome. And I am thrilled that you are here with us today. The first thing I really want to take just a minute to say, one, I'm very glad you're here. I know what your day looks like. I know that there are lots of things that may be needing your attention, or the to-do list is really long, but I want to take just a few minutes to ground us. This presentation will cover student advocacy, a little bit about the science of learning and thriving, and finding ways to thrive with students. So in order to kind of come together in community, I want to read these words to you. Just take a few minutes, get comfortable in your seat or wherever you're sitting. Take a nice deep breath in. Let the day slow down just a little bit. You belong here. You are valued. You have everything you need to be successful. All you have to do is show up and be yourself. Let's learn and grow together. Let's connect in community, and let's be intentional and hopeful today. And I'd like to add just one more. Let's lower our expectations just for a minute. When I talk about caring communities and children thriving in schools, that's a really large topic. It can be overwhelming. And so lower our expectations just for a minute. And as you go through this presentation, think about one thing that really stands out to you. Think about one thing that you might be willing to think about after this presentation and provide to your students in your schools. But don't try to do it all. And I know that that pressure can be very real. But today, I want you to know that you are showing up serving kids in a very difficult time in our history. However, you are that person that is that safe person that helps kids thrive every single day. These are just some ideas that you might want to consider as we think about continuing the growth of our programs. I want to take a quick poll. Now, we're not taking an official poll, just kind of a mental poll, if you will. And I'd like you to answer these 3 questions to yourself. If you're taking notes, maybe write this down. If you're not, just think about it. In school, have you ever heard an adult speak negatively about a child? Yes or no? Have you ever witnessed something called toxic positivity? If you don't know what toxic positivity is, don't worry, we'll cover it a little bit later. Yes or no, or I'm not sure. And the last one is, are our school systems set up for children to be resilient and to survive, or to thrive? Just think about those words right now. Resilient, to survive, or to thrive. Unfortunately, I have collected some data around these very topics, and it's an overwhelming amount of numbers that adults and children tell me that these things do happen in our school, that adults do sometimes speak negatively about children, and that there is this thing called toxic positivity that we'll talk about later. And also that children do survive through schools, but is that really all we want for them? I used to think the word resilient was exactly what I wanted kids to have, to be able to bounce back from hard situations. But the more I learn about learning science, and the more I learn about child development, especially related to traumatic experiences, I realized that bouncing back is not the only answer. So I also want you to take a deep breath, because there may be some things in this presentation that have you questioning, or maybe wondering like, oh, is she really saying that? Is she really expecting that? Is she really saying that we really need to push through some of these systems in our schools? That is correct. That's probably what you'll hear me say in just a few minutes. Before we begin, this presentation will talk a lot about student voice and student advocacy. And we asked some of our kids in our district if they could imagine what would they want in the world, in themselves, in their schools. What could they imagine? And I just want to share this quick video clip. It's just a few students who came together and wrote a community poem. And so it's called Imagine. going to pause the video, and if you would like to shout out anything, any one word that comes up for you after seeing that, those words from those 6th grade students. And what comes to mind for me is a powerful reminder of what students are thinking about, what they are concerned about, what their lives look like. So if you have a thought or a word that you'd like to throw into the chat about your reaction to the Imagine video, I'd love to see it. As we get into a little bit deeper into this presentation, let's start with student advocacy. And as you know, if you understand about student advocacy through the model, the Ask a National model, there are 4 things that I want to point out in that model. That part of a school counselor's job is to eliminate barriers impeding students' development. Secondly, collaborating. We are the folks that show up and collaborate within and outside of our school building walls to meet the needs of kids. A lot of times we are the only voice that is celebrating a child that may be really challenged in school. Creating opportunities. Part of our job also around student advocacy is creating learning opportunities for all students and ensuring access to quality school curriculum. And the 4th, leading, promoting positive systematic change in school. Now, those are huge topics, and I would never expect a school counselor to be able to do every single one of these things in isolation or alone. But I put this at the forefront of this presentation to remind us that student advocacy is really critical to students thriving. So we know that when students have a voice in our school systems, they feel these things: greater self-esteem, academic improvement, and trust and respect between students and staff grow. There's an increased sense of belonging, stronger sense of agency, that students can make a difference. So when we listen to students and they share with us their experiences, what they're thinking about, what's in their hearts and their heads, we are able to increase how they feel, not only about themselves, but about their environment. And when we create these opportunities, we provide the students the ability to thrive. So this is going to feel just a little bit like graduate school. If you don't mind, we're going to talk about epigenetics for a minute. And maybe you've heard of this word, maybe you haven't. The science of learning and thriving is actually something that I am new to this learning. And I want to introduce you to a person and a new colleague of mine, developing a relationship with and actually partnering in how can we change the system and student experiences in Cajon Valley Union School District so that kids can thrive. And so epigenetics is before the genes. And so Dr. Pam Cantor, if you don't know who she is, I would say Google her after this presentation, not right now, but Google her. She has some incredible research and outcomes that I am really learning about. And she has a lot of knowledge and experience around adolescent psychiatry, specializing in trauma. And so I want to share just a little bit about her webinar. And in this presentation, the full webinar is, of course, available to you, but I'm going to just provide just a little bit about what epigenetics means and how it kind of applies to our topic today. So I'm going to pop this in. Hopefully I'm getting it to the right location. Here we go.
About the development of the brain and learning science, I would have begun with this. There are 20,000 genes in the human genome, yet in our lifetime, fewer than 10% will ever be expressed. Well, what determines what's in that 10%? It's context, the environments, experiences, and relationships in our lives. This is the field known as epigenetics. Epi means above, what is above the genes. This is what defines human life and human potential, because genes are chemical followers. They're little packages of protein with receptors on their surface that are triggered into expression by context, environments, experiences, and relationships. It is context that determines who we become, how we learn, and even the expression of our genes. The risks and the opportunities in development sit inside this one profoundly important point, that there is no separation of nature and nurture, biology and environment, brain and behavior, only a collaboration between them. Developmental and learning science tell a very optimistic story about what all young people are capable of, because children's brains and bodies and abilities are malleable to experience, because the human brain is a dynamic living structure made up of tissue that is the most susceptible to change from experience of any tissue in the human body. The brain is also malleable over time. Most of its growth happens after we're born, and the brain is most sensitive in the early childhood years. But today we know that adolescence is an especially important period for brain remodeling, where there are changes that bring about new capacities that couldn't have existed at an earlier time. So we know that change will continue based on new experiences, new relationships, all the way into young adulthood, with multiple opportunities to catch up. So there are really only 3 things to know about brain development: astounding malleability, experience-dependent growth, and the role of context. So if we optimize the design of context, we optimize development and learning. And if we do that, we optimize the possibility for positive life outcomes for many more kids. It's as simple as that.
So let's break it down just a little bit. Let's get to our next slide here. Environment, experience, and relationships. And we know that these 3 components really can affect a child's experience in school and the outcomes, as Dr. Cantor just shared with us. Context is critical. And I want us to kind of think about this through the lens of our work with children in schools. So just having this information about context, how can we see the idea of context to create caring communities in school? So through Dr. Cantor's work, she is an expert in whole child design and the science of learning. And if you look at this diagram, and again, back in her webinar, if you decide to watch the whole thing, and I encourage you to, she talks about it takes all of these components to help a healthy development, learning, and thriving child. And so we know that positive developing relationships is important. We know safety and environment and a sense of belonging is important to learning. We know that kids can't learn if they're not feeling psychologically or physically safe. We want to be engaged in a rich learning experience and knowledge and development of skills, habits, and mindsets, and an integrated system of support. Of course, being transformative, we want personalized activities for kids, empowering, and culturally affirming. So if you were to dive deeper into this model, you would also learn some things, assumptions, and facts about whole child development. So I'm going to ask us to kind of look at these assumptions together, and then we're going to examine them a little closer with the lens of shame. And so looking at these false statements, genes drive who we become. I want you to think about that. I know that this has been a part of many of our experiences or learning around human development or children, that we believe your genetics is truly how you, your outcome, how we end up turning out, right? That talent is scarce. We think that there are children in, who are extremely talented. We even have programs called Gifted and Talented, right? That some children have access to. Now, I'm not saying that these programs are not wonderful for some children, but I am saying that talent is plentiful and it's not on a bell curve. Average stands for the individual. We've all actually been in a system that measures us to the average, right? So you're either above average or you're below average. And the average rarely represents an individual. I would have been considered an average student. I would have been considered an average person, right? And the more I reflect on my own school experience, I realize there are talents and interests and values that I have that I could never be measured on a bell curve. We know that our educational system was built on a factory model, that we were to educate kids for a specific reason and way. We know now that agency and engagement support deeper learning. When kids feel like they are a part of the school, when they feel like learning is personalized, they feel confident. They feel like they are beginning to, they see the connection between what they want to be now and their possible future self. And then potential, the false assumption that potential is knowable in advance, that we can determine what a student outcome will be. We absolutely know now through whole child design and the science of learning that potential is visible in environments designed to reveal it, that children can thrive and there is deeper potential that may not show up in some of the systems that we have in place for kids. So I want you to think about these assumptions that maybe our school systems have been built on and truth. And you may be wondering, Tami, how does this apply to student advocacy, thriving, school counseling? I promise I'm getting to that. So I want you to look at Brene Brown's research or her definition of shame. Shame is an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. As we kind of approach some of the examples I want to share with you about how we're transforming and changing our system in Cajon Valley, I want to point this out. Schools and school systems have done an incredibly great job at showing kids how they have failed. We measure things up to a GPA system that we know is actually subjective in many ways. It's based on the experience the child has in a classroom with a specific educator. We know that in our counseling offices, we begin to see children who are struggling with what we would say is these low grades, low GPA, and low academic performance. So when children show up into our office, we often talk about their GPAs. And I'm here to share with you just some aha moments that I've learned in asking for authentic student feedback about those conversations. So I want to pull us back to using this definition of shame and some of the false statements and assumptions that we know not to be true anymore with the new research of brain development. So genes that drive who we become. If we don't turn out exactly how we think we're supposed to turn out, do we feel shame? Do we believe that our talents are incredibly personalized and that we can show up and just be ourselves and not be measured up to a bell curve? Do we believe that students are rarely average, that they have so many things that they have great potential, that they're not one-dimensional? Do we believe that when students believe they own the school and when they're engaged in their own learning, that things can happen that amaze us all? And do we believe potential is visible if the environment is right? Is it possible to believe this about all children? And just kind of take this in. We have in general in our school system have had a fixed mindset. Intelligence and talent is fixed at birth. That we kind of know the kids who are going to show up and do well in school. Or if they're doing well in school, we make the assumption according to our old system that they're going to be high school and college ready. Are we willing to take the chance that maybe intelligence and talent can be developed and grown? Now, I know I'm speaking your language right now. You're like, of course, I'm all about growth mindset. But our systems, unfortunately, haven't begun to recognize growth mindset in children yet. So in our current educational system, are we surviving? Many children are surviving. Are they resilient? Yes. Kids have a wonderful ability to bounce back from difficult situations. But if we stop there, we're not allowing children to develop their full potential. So I want to get into some real specifics on thriving and what we're doing in Cajon Valley. So thank you for letting me share just a little bit of the foundation and the background of why this is such important work for a school counselor. So what does it mean when I say the word thrive? So if you want to throw into the chat, like what one word would you say thriving means? And just go ahead and start lighting up the chat with, what does it mean? Does it mean success? Does it mean progress? What does thriving mean to you? I'm going to give just a few minutes to see, or a second or two to see if folks can throw some words in the chat. What does the word thrive mean? And Tanya, I don't know if you're available to shout out some of the words that might be showing up in the chat for us.
Yes, we've got progress and success, being your best self, all things possible, and the belief that they are achievable, confidence, happy, an overabundance, confident, enjoyment. And I was just going to write living your best life.
Wow. So I really appreciate this. I appreciate those powerful words that you said. Here's what I'm just noticing. And I don't, if you throw this in, there's no judgment here. But what I'm noticing is no one said a high GPA. No one said a perfect score on an assessment test. What I heard was the human experience and the human development side of things. Any other words that stand out for you, Tanya?
Just they're all very positive, confidence, happy, all the things you want students to be.
I love it. Thank you so much for those powerful words. I appreciate that. And yes, that's exactly what is in the vein of thriving when we talk about whole child design. Remember, kids are not one-dimensional. They have many, many things that show up at the table when we are talking about these wonderful humans with potential. So I want to get into just a little bit about student voice and why that is so critical to creating caring communities for children to thrive. Here's what a few of our students said when we asked them, what does thriving mean to you? And we really crafted it up with right now in your life at school. And here are some of the quotes. I left off student names, but some of the quotes were, when a teacher trusts me. Another student said, where I will not be judged by the color of my skin. I think you saw that show up in our video today. When a staff knows something about me that isn't about school. And when people call me by my name and help me feel safe. We also take student voice very seriously. And later on in this presentation, I'm just going to talk about 5 things that you can do to get students to really let us know what they're thinking. So one of the things that my school counselors did in Cajon Valley this year was we provided a needs assessment for all students, 3rd grade through 8th grade. And we collected over 7,000 student responses. And these were not anonymous. It's the first time that I've done a needs assessment that was not anonymous. And there were lots of ways to safeguard student responses and that sort of thing. But we really wanted to take a look at who possibly needed support very soon. We really wanted to understand how students were feeling. And so one of our questions was, I feel connected to an adult at school when, and we listed all of these things. And on this one, this was one school, one particular site, one grade level, 336 responses. Students said this was one of the highlights, but I will tell you across the district, it was very similar to those responses. When people at school greet me by my first name, I'm asked how I'm doing. I feel like a teacher trusts me and I get the support I need. Those were the big aha moments for us. So we took this needs assessment, and again, it was not anonymous. Students gave us their names. We then took the data and really analyzed who might need support first. And there were other questions around, do you feel like you have a friend at school? Are you struggling with connection? Are you struggling with academics? So we really were able to understand from a student-facing platform exactly where students were reporting. We did this in October, knowing that we were just learning about kids, but we took this information, and this was one of actually the slides that one of my staff shared out with their middle school teachers. We wanted teachers to hear directly what the students were reporting. And then we wanted to take action. And so here's another same school. I believe this is the same grade level. And so we asked kids again, I feel like I could use support in the following areas. And we collected this data. And one of the things that surprised us was that so many students were saying they wanted support in the areas of life at home and feeling connected. And even though I knew that these were probably some of the things kids were struggling with, I really didn't expect kids to report that so much to us in these areas. But the one that really they wanted support was around the academic success. They wanted help with friendships. They wanted help with solving problems. So you'll see where those blue columns are. But the surprise to me was we still had more than half of our kids saying life at home still is a struggle. And so we took all of this information and we decided, well, what are we going to do with it? This is what students are telling us they need. One of the things that we responded to was we decided that our students who were feeling that they may not be connected to school and there was some home life concerns, we developed something called Happy and Healthy Community Meetups. And these are supportive conversations that parents and students come together. We feed people. It is not a parent workshop. It's a parent and student conversation. We've had great success with these. The second one, or the next part of our presentation here, is thriving doesn't always mean happy. When we started this work, I was like, thriving kids must be happy kids. Not necessarily. We know growing is difficult. And so I want to share just a little bit about a phenomenon that is catching my attention right now, something called toxic positivity. And maybe you've heard this term before, maybe not. But toxic positivity is actually showing up in places all over the school district. And it's showing up on Twitter and it's showing up at different places where everything seems to be great, that we're overgeneralizing happy, optimistic. All of these events, we see these smiling faces. Now, of course, I don't want to shout out all of the kids that are unhappy either, but to actually show up and be authentic. Kids were letting us know that puts so much pressure on them to measure up and to be almost perfect. We know perfectionism is not a real thing, right? So we got some great feedback around kids saying, we just want to show up and be ourselves. There are going to be days where I struggle. There are going to be days where I, nail it. But all of these things are my authentic self. And the adults in our educational world, we're painting this picture of, look, we're only highlighting all of these great things. And what we're really doing is minimizing the authentic human emotion and experience. Another thing that we are learning about creating a place where students can thrive is creating psychological safety. And this is something that's very dear to my heart, because we know that children need to feel not only physically safe, but emotionally safe as they show up into our schools. And as you can see, there are some kind of ways that you can see if there's psychological safety showing up. So the agreements that I shared with you earlier in this presentation, where we started kind of our mindfulness, those agreements are posted throughout our school district and many classrooms. Our teachers who run circles start with very similar agreements. That's one way that you can create psychological safety, is having a way for students to see that they are being honored just by showing up as their authentic self. So here are some recommendations. This may be what you've signed up for, what you've been waiting for. All right, how do we make kids thrive? Again, it's a very big topic. And I think that if you can take one or two things away from today and maybe focus on some of your energy on that, I would love to learn more about what you're thinking. I know in a webinar, it's challenging for me, but I would love to hear at the end of the presentation, maybe one commitment that you're thinking. So here's what it kind of looks like in Cajon Valley. And here's the first growth plan. So assess, think through ideas in the context of environment, experiences, relationships. Think about what your environment looks like. Is it welcoming? When you come on campus, does it feel like that students would feel like they belong there? Are the experiences that students are having, is it something that they look forward to? Relationships, are students building relationships with adults on campus? Student voice, thinking through student voice and advocacy. As I said, we collected some student voice that way. We've done empathy interviewing. We have a TEDx event. I'm going to show you a little video later. TEDx is, or TED Talks is a part of our presentation literacy. And so we teach all kids to do TED Talks. And then we have this huge TED event that was actually this last weekend. It was fantastic. And I'm going to show you a past speaker. We think about whole child design and model to analyze your programs around that. So when I'm thinking about maybe a growth plan, I'm thinking about using the science of learning to rethink some of the things I'm doing in my comprehensive program. And then imagine a place where students are thriving in a caring community. Imagine what that looks like. Set your intentions to that. So what's the so what? What does it look like, Tami? I'm going to share this story with you because the color pink has now forever been ruined because of this tardy slip. I don't know what your practice is at your school district, but unfortunately, this has been one of our practices where a student, even in the younger grades, get these pink tardy slips. And I want to just run the scenario by you. So think about it. A child shows up, let's say even in high school, they're running late. Maybe their parents were running late. They're being dropped off, or they're walking to school, or something has happened. And so we know already there's this sense of urgency, this sense of anxiety, even if it shows up that they don't care. We know that underneath that little hard shell is somebody showing up going, great, I'm late again. And then they have to face the adults in the world of school systems, right? So we hand them this tardy slip and we put it on there, and then we put, please admit the student to class. We say excused or unexcused, and we sign that. What I'm wondering, and this is what I'm talking about thriving, if we are willing to change our systems just a little bit, think about how you might feel if you got this tardy slip or something that looked like this one. Now, this one is an elementary school. It's not my elementary school, but it's an example that I love. We're glad you're here. It still does all the same things that we need it to do, but this is a very different message of belonging. I want you to kind of reflect on, were you ever late to something? I hate being late. Were you ever late to something? And did you know you were late? You probably did, right? In this past system of these tardy slips, kids know they're late and they feel the anxiety of this system that doesn't feel very welcoming. What if you could change your slips to say, we're glad you're here? In Cajon Valley, some of our schools have kids check in through a computer system. And when they get the admit to class slip, it says, you belong. We're glad you're here. All you need to do is show up and be yourself. And that's the message we're sending to class with children. And I love that message. This is the one that you may question me about because I'm talking to school counselors. We talk about grades a lot because we do want kids to be successful past post-high school and beyond. What I'm going to challenge you with is to stop talking about grades. We have done a really good job in our educational system to inform kids of failure. What I'm wondering and what I would love for you to think about is to start talking about strength, interests, and values. Let's tap back into motivational interviewing. Let's reflect on what kids can do. Let's help them see their best possible future self. So the counselors in Cajon Valley, we do our due diligence and we let kids know about, what we need to do. We do our business. And I know if you're in high school, you need to inform kids about graduation requirements, GPAs, all of that. But what I am also encouraging you to do is make sure that that's not the only or the grounding part of your conversation. If we're really going to change where kids can thrive in school, we have to help them see their best possible future selves by thinking about what are their strengths, what are they interested in, and what are their values, either in the world of work or their personal values right now in schools. So self-discovery is an incredible part of having a student feel like they belong. Here's the other thing I'd like to just push back a little bit on grades. Again, there has not been one child who ended up in my counseling office when I was at a school site who didn't realize they were failing. If there was, I can't remember it. We have done a really good job of informing kids of failure. What we need to grow in our work is helping kids see really what are they, where are their talents? So here's a couple of ways that you can give voice to students. This is from Harvard School of Education. Regularly solicit feedback. In our district, we provide two different moments in a school year where we ask students about how they're doing. Our next survey will come out a little bit later this month, and it is student facing, so it's not confidential. Or I should say they will be letting us know exactly who they are. We're not keeping it anonymous. Engage students in studying, assessing their schools. Have a focus group, have kids come and tell you, be willing to listen. I ran a restorative circle at one of our middle schools, and I simply asked them questions like, if you could change the school day, what would it look like? And again, I think many adults are afraid to ask these questions, and here's how I know why. We're afraid that we are not able to either provide what students are asking us to, or they're actually going to tell us how they really feel, right? And so what I encourage you to do is don't be afraid of those conversations with kids. Include authentic student representation on leadership teams. Recently, we had some assistant principal positions open up in our school district. We invited students where those openings might occur to come and be participants on the interview panel. Next, invite students to discuss anything related to their own learning. Part of what we're doing is using restorative circles to ask students, you know, this project is coming up. Maybe a test is coming up that's very difficult. What can we do as a school community to make sure every single person in our classroom is successful? Let me repeat that. We are asking kids in classrooms, if something's coming up that's hard, what can we do as a community to make sure every single person is successful? That brings a sense of belonging. When kids have ownership, they begin to thrive. More broadly, consider youth as your stakeholders and partners in your school, making decisions outside of leadership groups, not just your ASB, not just your school site council, but children who may be underrepresented. Give those students a voice. And so part of our thought around thriving is some promises in Cajon Valley. And if you come to our school district, you're going to see these everywhere. And even though you may not have like some guarantees from a school district or whatever, you could still create things in your own scope, in your own counseling office, in your own counseling departments. What are the promises that you are going to guarantee every single child? These happen to be our school district promises. We take student voice so seriously. We have something called TEDx Kids El Cajon. We were actually one of the first school districts to have a licensed TEDx event. This was 8 years ago, or we were licensed 8 years ago. This is one of our students, and I just want you to hear why student voice is so important and to think about the potential of a student that may have been uncovered. So I hope you enjoy this quick, I think it's a 4-minute TED Talk. We may not watch the whole thing, but I do hope that you hear some of the things that are resounding around thriving.
Kids these days, they're just kids. Back in my day, these are all phrases we kids hear just about every day. Unfortunately, I don't think these phrases were meant to build us up nor inspire us. Sure, kids these days are different, but I believe you're more than just kids. In 2017, at the age of 9, I started my own business. When I first told people about starting a business, I feel like they underestimated me. They made comments like, "But you're only 9." And I'm sure they were thinking, that won't last long. But here I am, 3 years later, my business is still growing. This got me thinking, if I can start a business at 9, what are other kids doing? Well, I did a little research and found that kids these days really are doing great things. Take the following amazing children, for example. Alexa Grable was just 10 years old when she created the nonprofit Bags of Books, which helps get books in the hands of kids who might not otherwise be able to afford them. Through Bags of Books, Alexa has distributed over 120,000 books to schools, homeless shelters, and even children's hospitals. What about Josh Kaplan, who, when playing on a soccer team in Arizona, noticed the brother of one of his teammates was kicking a soccer ball by himself on the sidelines? This boy had Down syndrome and other disabilities, so he was not able to join the team, but he still loved the game. Josh soon realized there were lots of kids like his teammate's brother that loved soccer but didn't have anyone to play with. So he founded Goals, which stands for Giving Opportunities to All Who Love Soccer, a nonprofit that pairs soccer-loving kids with disabilities with soccer-loving kids who don't have disabilities. Goals organizes 2 non-competitive scrimmages every month and has even become an official partner with the Special Olympics in Arizona. Okay, just one more. She may not have reached double digits in terms of age, but Ahara Perez is well into the triple-digit IQ range. This 8-year-old from Mexico City has a higher IQ than super genius Albert Einstein. According to the Yucatan Times, Perez finished elementary school by 5, middle school by 6, and high school by 8. Now she is reportedly in the process of earning 2 degrees online, one in industrial engineering and mathematics, and one in systems engineering. How amazing is that? Kids these days. No, we don't have to walk uphill both ways, barefoot in the snow to get to school. But yes, some of us still walk, some of us still bike, and some of us still ride the bus. Sure, we have laptops, tablets, some lucky ones have cell phones, and I'm sure we know how to use the apps on our parents' phones better than they do. But as far as I can see, we're changing the world. Like right now, did you know there's a 5th grader named Treyanne from our very own Cajon Valley School District who is a leukemia patient that has dedicated her time and efforts during quarantine to making over 300 masks for Rady's Children's Hospital workers and their families? So do me a favor, stop using all those negative phrases you're using toward us. Not all of us are disrespectful. Not all of us think life should be easy. Stop underestimating us and start giving us a chance. I guarantee we will surprise you. I will continue to do my part and have a positive impact on this world. I promise.
I absolutely love that presentation. I hope that you can see how giving kids this opportunity can help them thrive. And finally, relationships. We know that everything is relational. We know that when kids show up in our care, that building relationships can change the trajectory of a student not belonging or belonging in our school district. I know that I'm probably getting close to time, but I want to give you just a few resources to help with that. One of the things I didn't cover, I'm going to go back here. Here we go. One of the things that I did not cover under relationships is something called moral judgment. And as I come to a close, I just want to share this with you. You will never hear me speak negatively about a child. I say this to you not because I believe that you are speaking negatively about children, but I say this to you as an accountability piece. We say this in our district now to each other, that we will not speak negatively about children, and that we will use words to describe behavior. We will use compassionate words. We have been stuck in a system that has trapped children into a deficit model. Let's start thinking about a progressive model that moves us away from, earlier I said in the presentation description, moving away from empathy. And let me describe what moving away from empathy and into compassion means. When I am empathetic, I understand my heart is deeply maybe aching for something that you're experiencing, and I'm sitting with you in that pain. We have been sitting with children in pain, especially through a pandemic in these trying times. What I'm encouraging you to do is also move into compassion. And compassion means that we will inspire, we will help children thrive, we will create environments that help children thrive. So we're going to move away from empathy and into compassion by building relationships with kids. We also know that when we create these safe spaces, that children will be able to learn more, feel safe, develop friendships, and progress. We call that thriving. This just happens to be my superintendent. He is very involved in developing relationships. He loves the TEDx Kids program, and we had such a great weekend, and we love seeing the kids do this. When you experience things like this with kids, you begin to see deeper relationships. Now, I will say you may feel a little bit like, Tami, how can we provide a TEDx event? How can we do all these things? Again, start with one thing. Start with something that might resonate with you. Start with student voice. Start with student advocacy. And if there's anything I can leave with you, if these bigger programs seem overwhelming or daunting, start with, I will not speak negatively about a child. I know that when people speak negatively about a child, and usually this means something about compassion fatigue. And so when I shout this out to you now, you will hold me accountable. I know that Tami won't speak negatively about a child, but if she does, please treat her gently. Please treat her with compassion. She's probably really tired. And come alongside me and ask me if I'm okay. And the reason I share that with you is because we've made a serious commitment about thriving in our school district. And kids have been loud and clear about relationships are important with us. They want us to trust them. They want us to get to know them. And in doing that, there is a site called Lives in the Balance. It is some resources that can help us craft up language that describes behavior, but does not describe a child negatively. Also, there's just a quick community building circles video that I created for teachers in our district. You can use it as is, or you can just kind of take some pieces away from it. We know that developing community building circles is also a great way to help student voice, help kids thrive in caring communities. And the last one, just wanted to throw this out to you, strength, interests, and values. It's our way of talking about motivating kids to see their best possible future self, because we've stopped talking about grades in Cajon Valley. I hope that that you are taking away something that is useful to you in this presentation. And I think I'm here at this link. I always forget to do things like this. So here is a survey link. And I'm gonna hope, yes, there's Tanya. She's gonna join in and help me navigate this slide.
Yes, so I've also put the link into the chat, or if you have the slide deck up, you can click on the link in the slide deck, or you can point your phone camera at the QR code and the survey will pop right up. You just take it right from your phone. So 3 different ways, but we really appreciate feedback, and there's a spot in there to provide positive comments for Tami, just to thank her for an amazing webinar. And when Tami does a webinar, I always feel so inspired to go out and make changes to my own practice. And so Tami, thank you so much. So many great ideas. And if you haven't walked on a campus in Cajon Valley, if you haven't seen this in life, it is amazing. My brother works with special education students and with severe disabilities, and he's even talking this talk. And so when you hear adults really invested in this mindset, in this change, it makes such an impact. So I encourage you to check in with Tami, see what's going on in Cajon Valley, because there's so many great things happening.
Thank you,
Tami,
Tanya.
thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Can I just say one more thing, call to action? If you want to just throw one thing that stood out to you in the chat, I would love to see that right now. And maybe Tanya could shout those out. But one thing that resonates you, even if it's just, hey, I'm thinking about changing the way we greet kids at school through our late slip system, or I'm going to make the commitment to make sure that those around me are not using moral judgment language, that I'm going to be that positive force. If you're willing and brave enough, throw one thing in there. And that way we can just send positive thoughts back to you. But thank you so much for letting me share these ideas today.